Ana and Orange, whom I'll introduce in a few minutes. We're here this morning to talk about 3 case studies for historic preservation in Orange County. The cities of Anaheim, Santa Ana, and Orange are among the oldest in Orange County, and all of these cities contain similar historic resources despite their differing more recent histories of land use, demographics, and development. All 3 cities have taken a variety of approaches to the types of preservation planning tools they use and how they implement them to manage their historic resources. I'll begin by giving you a quick sketch of the historical background of these 3 cities, and then we'll get on with talking about historic preservation programs in the present and in the future. So first I want to do a brief historical introduction. You're looking at a map here of the ranchos of Orange County as of 1886. The land grants of the 1840s in California were given by the government of Mexico to utilize and approve large tracts of land up to 44,000 acres in size. By 1846, such land grants covered most of the land in what would later become Orange County. California became a state in 1850 then, and the Mexican land grants became almost impossible to sustain in court. However, the land grants that covered the area of Orange County that we were speaking of were still in the hands of the original grantees when American settlers looking for land to purchase started seeking land in this part of Los Angeles County as it was then known. Newport Bay became a stop on the shipping trade routes as early as 1870, and the Southern Pacific Railroad connected the new towns to Los Angeles, moving south to reach Anaheim by 1875, Santa Ana by 1877, and Orange by 1880. So starting out with Anaheim, you can see a bird's eye of Anaheim up on the top there. In 1837, Juan Pacifico Ontiveros had been granted the rancho known as San Juan Cajón de Santa Ana. Much of the rancho remained in the family, but large portions of it were sold off at various points in the mid-19th century. One of these purchases was made by George Hansen, a German-born surveyor, on behalf of 50 German families in San Francisco who were looking for land to establish an agricultural colony for viticulture and winemaking. Hansen moved down to the colony himself and laid out the town and farm plan for Anaheim in 1857 and established a connection to the Santa Ana River for a water source. So you can see the early town there in that upper view of Anaheim. Settlers started to arrive in 1858 to build their homes and establish their vineyards, and both the agricultural base and the town grew, with the Southern Pacific connecting Anaheim to Los Angeles by rail in 1875, as I mentioned. Just below it, you can see a very similar bird's eye view of Santa Ana, which was founded on land from another purchase directly from a land grant family holding. The area was part of the neighboring Rancho Santiago de Santa Ana, which originated with an 1810 land grant to Jose Antonio Yorba. His descendants sold 650 acres of the rancho to Jacob Ross Sr., and from that, Ross sold about 74 acres to William Spurgeon, a settler from Kentucky. Spurgeon paid $595 for all the land, on which he established the town of Santa Ana with 24 square blocks divided into 10 lots each. The town of Orange was also formed by a portion of the Rancho Santiago de Santa Ana that was, at the time of succession of California by Mexico, owned by the Peralta and Yorba families. Alfred Beck Chapman and Andrew Glassell were 2 attorneys whose names are well known in Orange County history. They had been purchasing land in the area and gained further acreage as payment in a lawsuit, and the town of Orange was laid out by Andrew Glassell's brother, William T. Glassell, on a portion of those lands in 1870. The town of Orange was a very compact square of 40 acres laid out with a plaza at the center, the only such town plan in Orange County. And if you've been there, you probably recall that circular plaza in the middle. The 10-acre farm lots that surrounded the town itself brought it to 640 acres, which happens to be an acreage of 1 square mile. In other words, the same size and town and farm plan as Anaheim, just configured differently. As with Anaheim, its irrigation source was the Santa Ana River. So here we've got some typical small scenes on the small farms of the 3 towns, where walnuts, peppers, or some of the other crops that were grown here. Grapes, of course, when we were talking about the establishment of these towns, Anaheim in particular was grown as a winemaking colony, so they grew grapes there for that purpose. But you can see here what some of these small operations looked like. Down in the lower image, there's a water ditch, a zanja for irrigation. some of the typical small farms and an aerial view then of the groves and the buildings kind of clustered at the corners between different small holdings, which were typically about 5 acres in size. Also included in that early agricultural landscape were some building types that we've kind of forgotten about. In Anaheim and Santa Ana, these are the sugar beet factories that process the commodities grown into sugar. So in some cases, there were commodity crops grown, and then there were large industrial operations that processed them. The land that became Orange County was originally part of the county of Los Angeles, as I mentioned. The area of Los Angeles County was enormous, and the southern part of the county was growing in economic activity, mainly in agriculture, as well as in population. And as early as 1869, there was an effort in the state legislature to divide the county. These early proponents wanted it to be called Anaheim County. In 1889, then Orange County was officially established. There was heated dispute over where the boundary should be, as well as competition between the two largest cities, Anaheim and Santa Ana, for designation as the county seat, and as you know, Santa Ana prevailed. This is the county courthouse in Santa Ana from 1901. Some of the towns in Orange County that originated in the 1880s were a result of that population and land sales boom that resulted from competitive promotion between the Southern Pacific and Santa Fe railroads. All 3 communities that we're speaking of today predate this boom, but they were clearly affected by it. These are some early views of what the towns looked like in the late 19th century. Here's early Anaheim with some wood frame buildings on the bottom, and then on the top, one of these sort of fancier brick buildings, all mixed in together. These are very similar images of early Santa Ana on the top there, the business district of Santa Ana, and then below, one of the neighborhoods of larger houses in Santa Ana. And then here's some pictures of early Orange. You can see, again, the same sorts of building types, this mix of masonry buildings with these kind of the false front commercial buildings. And then this is some early design of the plaza with the fountain in the center. Here's some of the similar equipment that the towns had, like most small towns throughout the United States. These are the earlier versions of the city halls of all 3 cities. None of these buildings survive, and they were all rebuilt at least once or twice after this. Here are the Carnegie Libraries that were located in each of these towns. So some of these do survive. This is a map of Orange of the county in 1921 with the 3 cities indicated with circles. So that's Anaheim at the top, Santa Ana over here, and Orange at the bottom. Note how the street grid, you can see it kind of advancing southward across the county. And keep in mind that much of the grid that you're seeing below that is actually, even up in this area, up in the upper part, is still rural routes that you can see indicated here. And later, these became the arterial routes through the suburban landscape, but by 1921, that was not at all what was present. Throughout the early 20th century, farmland in the central areas of these towns became increasingly subdivided for suburban residential lots and populated with vernacular neoclassical cottages and then later craftsman-style bungalows. Santa Ana, perhaps because of its status as the county seat, tended to have neighborhoods of larger houses from this era before World War I, as well as after when the preferred styles changed. The outlying districts, mostly outside of the incorporated boundaries, remained in agricultural uses for much of the 20th century. If you've seen aerial views of the county through the 1950s, you'll know that the landscape was still dominated by orange groves into the post-war period, and I even remember them in Orange County as a kid in the 1970s in the South County. These are 20th century views of the growing downtowns of Anaheim and Santa Ana. I love how these are kind of all the same format. There's Anaheim, there's Santa Ana, and the pictures are the same. You know, there's sort of the conventions of how to photograph a bustling cityscape, and even these 1960s postcards are essentially the same. By 1950, the area continued to be dominated by orange groves and bean fields, and it was home to only 216,000 people in 1950. So that's all of Orange County. So you can see that the changes then started to happen very quickly in the following decades. The post-war period saw major changes in the infrastructure of Orange County and in its economic base. Jobs in high-tech manufacturing, specifically aerospace jobs, were brought in with the establishment of Douglas, Lockheed, and Hughes in the context of such jobs proliferating throughout Southern California. Disneyland led the way in the 1950s with entertainment and recreation jobs. The Anaheim Convention Center was another major development of this period. In the 1960s, the Santa Ana Civic Center was a major redevelopment project that changed the face of the city to the west of the historic county courthouse, replacing older neighborhoods and altering the scale and the street pattern on the edge of the historic downtown. In the 1970s, downtown Anaheim fared much worse. It was completely demolished, except for one sort of multi-story building, leaving a void in the center of the historic neighborhoods of the original Colony District. The population of Orange County hit 1 million in 1963, so that was a more than fourfold increase from 1950, so a fourfold increase in just 13 years. By 1990, just 40 years after 1950, the county's population was more than 11 times what it had been in 1950, at 2.4 million people. So we're just talking about unbelievable rates of growth and just the landscape just being eaten up by subdivision after subdivision after subdivision, some of which end up being potential historic districts in the future. So the population, okay, so that brings us pretty much up through the post-war period, and I want to go ahead and introduce the rest of the panel here. To my, well, you'll see on the, to the left on the screen, just to the left of me is Christy Nguyen. She's an associate planner for the city of Anaheim. In the middle is Holly Sobolewski, associate planner for this, senior planner for the, I didn't think that was right. Senior planner for the city of Santa Ana. And Marissa Mosier, she's the preservation planner for the city of Orange. And all three manage historic resources inventories, historic district regulations, and Mills Act contracts. And I don't know if we have full bios anywhere, but John may have that. So what we want to show you here is a chart that you can refer to while we're talking just a little bit, and then you'll actually be able to see our faces and it'll be a little more engaging, hopefully. I'd like each of you to just describe your programs in brief terms while everybody can kind of review all the information that's up on the screen. Christy, let's start with you, and you can tell us about the program in Anaheim.
Okay, sure. So Anaheim's historic preservation program started back in the late 70s and early 1980s when our redevelopment agency decided to demolish most of our downtown commercial core in the name of blight. Around that time, about 200 square acres of our commercial historic area was demolished. During that time, a local group of residents started to speak up and lobbied City Council to form the first citywide inventory of historic structures. And from that came our list that we still currently monitor today. We have about 1,400 properties that we are classifying as historic within our city. Most of them are within our 4 local historic districts, but we do have a few of them outside of that as well. Our program is a little bit different than most programs in the state in the fact that we don't have a formal historic preservation ordinance. We don't have any sort of required design review or formalized historic preservation commission. And because we don't have those things, we're not considered we aren't eligible to even apply for a certified local government. And in general, our program just is not mandatory. So you might be wondering what it is that I do. So what our program is really a series of suggested guidelines laid out in a citywide historic preservation plan. And those guidelines have a series of suggested design guidelines for historic properties, mostly residential, unfortunately, since so many of our commercial properties were demolished. And those standards follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. We also rely heavily on education. So educating homeowners that they have historic properties and letting them know what they're proposing to do might impact the historic integrity of those properties. We also provide complimentary design review, which Jennifer actually helps us with. And the only thing that we do have actually in our zoning code is a 60-day demolition notice. And we also have a historic preservation committee that I report to every 2 months And then our program is very much incentive-based. So a former manager of mine used to like to say that our program is all carrot and no stick, with our carrot really being the Mills Act program, which is something that we rely on very heavily. We actually have 341 Mills Act contracts, which we believe is third in the state.
Okay, thanks. Holly, do you want to talk about the program in Santa Ana a bit?
Certainly. Our program began in a very similar fashion to Anaheim's, in that there was a lot of older residences and beautiful architectural buildings that were being demolished at a great rate, starting in the 70s and into the 80s. We had a wonderful woman named Adelaide Walker who spearheaded the whole entire preservation movement in Santa Ana, and she was able to convince the city council that a lot of the buildings were worth saving, even if they needed to be moved to do that. So through her, a historic committee was formed, and they identified the top 100 buildings that were the most threatened or most significant in the city of Santa Ana. By 1999, the historic preservation movement had grown to the point that the city council decided it was time to have an actual city code. So we do have an ordinance. It's Chapter 30 of the Santa Ana Municipal Code, which also establishes our Historic Preservation Commission, they review all kinds of they put properties on the historic list. They also approve Mills Act contracts. Ultimately, City Council is the final say in that. But they also look at any modifications to historic structures. We currently are a certified local government with the state of California. We became certified in 2001. And through that, we maintain a system of survey. We do need to catch up on that, but we have surveyed the city citywide, and we have Mills Act program intact in the ordinance as well. We currently have 612 properties on the historic list, and we have 251 Mills Act properties. So, great. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Marissa, would you like to tell us about the program in Orange?
Yeah, Orange is a very similar story to Santa Ana and Anaheim. Mainly community groups interested in preservation, particularly of Old Town. So the commercial core around the plaza that Jennifer showed you, and the residential neighborhood surrounding that. Starting in the 1970s and 80s, particularly the Orange Community Historical Society and the Old Town Preservation Association. And that first started with a series of designations to the National Register, first of the Plaza Park, so that's the center of the roundabout in the plaza, in 1978, and then the actual Plaza Historic District in 1982. And then the 1990s are really when the city starts to build the framework for a preservation program. So that started with surveying Old Town and the surrounding residential neighborhood in 1991, ultimately resulting in the city council designating a local historic district for Old Town, which is about a mile square and a little more than 1,300 contributing properties. At about the same time, the city hired a staff planner for preservation full-time. Also adopted design standards for the Old Town Historic District in 1995, and then started a Mills Act program in 1998. So we have 229 Mills Act properties currently. We currently have a historic district ordinance, which allows us to designate historic districts, but not necessarily individual landmarks. We're not a CLG. We do have a cultural resources and historic preservation element to the general plan. That was updated most recently in 2010, and really continued the focus on the Old Town Historic District, but also started to recognize that there are other areas of the city that have potential to be historic districts or to be identified as individual historic properties. So we're starting to begin to broaden the focus of the preservation program in Orange.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go over to, let me get to the camera. Okay, so we're gonna assume that everyone can see us there. We see ourselves in a little window. Okay. So we're gonna go topic by topic and sort of continue to compare these three programs and see what the approach is in different cities. So I think first we're gonna start off talking about the Mills Act, which is really the biggest incentive that all three cities have. And I should have mentioned, Christy referred to it, but Architectural Resources Group has been consulting to the city of Anaheim for many years. I've been doing it for 10 years of that. So I know the most about the Anaheim program, but the way that all of us kind of got together was that we realized that Anaheim would probably benefit from knowing what its neighbors were doing. And so we went to Marissa and talked about the program in Orange, and then we went to Holly, we talked about the program in Santa Ana, and then we realized that probably even more than just these three cities would be interested. So we're really glad that you're all joining us here today. So we'll take more questions at the end, of course. If you need any clarifications along the way, John might catch those if you put them in the chat. But we're going to start off talking about the Mills Act. And I'd be interested to know what property types are typically eligible or included in your program. When did you go ahead and start, Marissa?
Yeah, we accept both residential and commercial properties into the Mills Act. We have the number of contributors in the Old Town Historic District is mainly residential, so most of our properties are single-family residential, though we do have a handful of buildings around the plaza, commercial buildings that have also received Mills Act contract. We see in Orange, particularly with the single-family residences, that the real estate agents are actually advertising to their clients that the Mills Act is available as an incentive. So we're getting a lot of interest from those kinds of buyers.
Yeah. And we do find in Anaheim also that the realtors are really some of the greatest supporters of the Mills Act program, and they love to tout that either if the building already has a contract, or if it could potentially have a contract. So that keeps us very busy going on looking at houses that are about to sell.
That's actually been one of the strongest incentives in Santa Ana too. So originally, I can honestly tell you that when I would go to individual neighborhoods to promote Mills Act and to promote historic designation, people were coming at me with torches and pitchforks, and they didn't want it. At that time, the realtors were saying, no, you'll never be able to sell this house. You'll never be able to do anything with it. And that mindset change really has done a lot to promote preservation in Santa Ana, because you're right, now the realtors are buying.
There's a lot of, in Anaheim, there are a lot of realtors on the committee, the preservation committee, and so they're big supporters of preservation in general, and they see what a difference that tool has made for them.
For us in Santa Ana, the properties that we usually market the Mills Act to are mostly residential properties. We do have just a few commercial properties that obtained the Mills Act most recently. The ones that we found that benefit the most are the residential, because the nature of the Mills Act is that it reassesses a property based it on rental values rather than fair market value. So that reassessment comes into place, and typically the rental values are considerably less than the fair market value per square foot. And so commercial properties do benefit, at least in the very beginning, while they have to undergo rehabilitation. But then usually as time goes on and they have been rehabbed, and the owners can now charge greater rental rates, the value of the Mills Act decreases in direct response to that. But residential, we still see savings of around 50 to 75% on property taxes.
I think that's about the same for us too. And we don't have that many historic commercial buildings, but for the people that have applied, sometimes, I always refer them to the county assessor's office to talk to them about an estimated savings over the years for the Mills Act, and sometimes they'll just come back and say that it just doesn't pencil out for them. So by far, most of our Mills Act consultations that we go on, I think we do about an average of 40 per year, are at single family residences. generally, anyone on one of our lists of historic properties, contributor to one of our historic districts, or a qualified historic structure within the city is eligible to apply, but we really only take those that are in the highest level of integrity and maintenance.
So it seems like all three programs are really based on historic districts and contributors to historic districts. And so what we're seeing a lot of in Anaheim, then, we're mostly dealing with small houses, in a lot of cases very modest houses, that are contributors to a historic district that runs up through the end of the period of significance is 1949. So there's a wide variety of sort of styles and types of buildings within that, but they're all basically kind of single-family houses from about 1,000 to 1,500, 1,800 square feet or so.
Right, generally pretty small. But the tax savings do make a big impact for the owners.
And not all of ours are historic districts. We have two national registered districts, French Park and the downtown. And then we have one district that is protected by zoning that was put into place prior to our municipal ordinance being adopted, formulating our historic program. So really three districts, but I'd say that a good 75% or more are outside of those districts.
Oh, okay. So yours are mostly individual resources then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Does each of your cities have a cap in the number of contracts, and do you consider the numbers sustainable?
We have a cap of 60, but I don't think
Per year.
Per year. But I don't think we've ever really gotten close to that, at least not recently. I think our average is probably around 18 per year. We do, like I said, about 40 consultations, and then 18 of those will potentially get a contract. So I think that even that number is probably a lot for us. I'm a part-time employee, and I do have one other staff member that works with me, and she's part-time as well. And so we try to do what we can with the amount of time that we have, but it is sort of limiting in the number of applications we could really accept each year. I think if it were 60, we would have a problem on our hands. Yeah, but so far it's been okay.
I mean, at least that number represents the kind of a big vote of confidence that you got from the city council at some point.
Right,
The more Mills Act, the better.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so that's a good thing.
Anybody else?
We did have a cap at one time when our Mills Act fees had been adjusted, thank goodness. At first they were very low, free, and then it went up to 500, and then it went up to 1,000, and then it took a major jump to close to $5,000 for a Mills Act contract. And of course, it does pay off for the property owners over a course of time, but you know that's still a lot of money. So people were holding back, and as a result, there was a lot of pent-up demand. So we reduced our fees to half, so now it's a little over 2,000. And in the last 2 years, we've had probably about 35 to 45 Mills Acts per year. And then you're right, Christy, it's a lot. It's a lot of work. But we, thank goodness, our council has been very. They really respond well to the Mills Act and historic preservation. They know that's a big part of what has made Santa Ana the success commercially that it's shown today. So hopefully we'll maintain that. And I do think we still have a lot more resources that are eligible for Mills Act. So, you know, if the price stays at a fee structure stays at a medium level, I think it is sustainable.
Yeah, Orange until very recently had a cap of no more than 10 contracts per year. Last fall, our city council voted to remove that cap entirely. So this is the first year where we will be processing as many applications as we receive. In the past, we had received, on average, about 10 a year. Some years a few fewer, some years a few more. So we'll see. I have been getting a lot of questions this spring, though, about people who have heard that the cap has been removed and are interested in the program because of a little bit of that publicity. So it will be interesting from a management standpoint, how much work it's going to be depending on the number of contracts that we receive. Yeah, it does feel a little bit like we're standing in front of the flood, but we'll see. What I think is kind of more than the applications that we receive in any given year, the staff time that we're dealing with in managing the program overall. And we have 229 contracts currently, and are working slowly to get a 5-year inspection program going. We have engaged a consultant to do that because it's not feasible to have staff do those 5-year inspections. So we're targeting between 40 and 50 properties a year just to get us started on those inspections. But I'm interested to hear how everyone else is dealing with this, because that's the big issue for us.
So Holly, how often do you inspect and who does the inspections?
Well, we have our MOSAC program is a little bit different. I know state laws have changed recently, so I'm sure we'll have to change with that. But what we've done up until this point is, rather than have annual inspections, we require the property to be fully rehabbed up front. So before we'll allow it to have a Mills Act, it has to have all those things, those repairs and routine maintenance in place prior to getting on the historic list and obtaining a Mills Act. Now I know, of course, we're going to have to adjust and come up with some sort of way, but again, with 251 Mills Acts, I would imagine that we'll probably have to get a consultant as well.
You're talking about the increase in the frequency of the inspections.
Yes, because of the way that we had structured our Mills Act program, we weren't doing annual inspections.
You figured that the houses were rehabbed, you didn't need to inspect because they didn't really have a 10-year plan that you were holding.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, instead of having that 10-year plan, we had to fix everything up front, and then left it pretty much to the neighbors and to let us know if somebody was doing some work without a permit or something bad was happening to a house. And so as a result, I think we'll probably have to begin doing some form of inspections now.
Christy, do you want to just talk about how you do inspections in Anaheim?
Yeah, ours is a little bit different. So we actually require a high level of integrity as well before they apply for the Mills Act program. Most of the exterior features, at least what's visible from the public right-of-way, need to be restored prior to getting into the program. But then we also do annual inspections. And the way those are done now is because of limitation on staff time, is that our local historic preservation committee, which is an ad hoc group of local residents, many of whom were actually the first advocates for historic preservation in Anaheim. They do the first round of annual inspections for us. So we have 341 Mills Act contracts now. And so they are going to be performing the annual inspections for those next month, actually. They do the first round, and any of the properties that they've seen issue with, they let staff know. And then we go back and re-inspect those properties and follow up with the homeowners. So it's kind of a year-round cycle of inspecting and following up and working with those homeowners. But we found that being able to work with the committee makes it a lot more manageable than if we were to have to do all of those inspections, especially annually.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about communication and public relations. And actually, I think that as a segue from Mills Act to that topic, I'm noticing that there's chat on the screen that says that people are having trouble hearing us. There is a lot of background noise in this room from the air system, but we're going to try to face the microphone and speak as loudly as we can. But in the meantime, we've got a video that was produced by the City of Anaheim that we're going to show. And so this is about a 4-minute video, and it shows how the City of Anaheim has been communicating through their website to tell people about the program, the Mills Act program in the city.
Hi, I'm Christine Nguyen, Historic Preservation Planner for the City of Anaheim. We're here today in the lovely Anaheim Colony Historic District to talk about the city's Mills Act program. There are many benefits of being a historic property owner here in the City of Anaheim, and one of the most exciting opportunities is the chance to participate in the city's Mills Act program. If you've never heard of the program before, by the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of what the program is and whether or not you might be interested in applying. So let's start with the basics. The Mills Act is a statewide program that offers a local property tax savings for historic property owners who maintain the historic characteristics of their properties. We have owners that save up to 60% in their property taxes every year. The city recognizes the extra costs of owning a historic property, and the tax savings are meant to be put back into the property to help preserve it. Properties that enter into the program set the bar for historic integrity and a high level of maintenance in their communities. Because of this, an added benefit of the program is an increase in property values of both the Mills Act property and the surrounding neighborhoods. The Mills Act contract is a 10-year revolving term, so that means at the end of every year, the contract is automatically renewed for another 10-year period. The contract stays with the property, so if a Mills Act property is sold, the new owners would automatically assume all of the responsibilities and the benefits of a Mills Act contract. Anaheim's Mills Act program has been very successful. It was adopted in 2001 and is now administered through the city's planning department. Today, we have over 300 properties throughout the city, which makes us the third largest program in the state. There's no fee to apply to Anaheim's program, but there may be some initial restoration costs in order to qualify. Mills Act recipients are also required to purchase and display one of these lovely bronze Mills Act plaques on their property. Property tax savings are calculated by the Orange County Tax Assessor's Office. There are a number of factors that go into that calculation, and you can get a better understanding of what your tax savings may be by contacting the Orange County Tax Assessor's Office directly. The city has over 1,400 properties that we've classified as historic. Now, not all of these properties may be eligible to apply for the Mills Act program. In general, any property built before 1949 in a historic district or before 1955 in the Hoskins Historic District that have not had any significant alterations may be eligible to apply. If you're interested to see if your property may be eligible, feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to look into it for you. Most property owners that apply for the Mills Act are required to restore certain items on their properties prior to submitting a Mills Act application. Some properties may require more restoration than others. In general, owners of properties that have their original features mostly intact and are well maintained will have less work to do than those with properties that have had alterations that are not easily reversible. So at this point, you might be thinking your property would be a good candidate for the Mills Act program, but you might still be asking yourself why you should apply. So here's a recap of all the perks. You get a tax break, your home receives recognition as an exceptional historic property, your property contributes to the historic character of the neighborhood, your property and the surrounding properties experience an increase in value, and you get a really sweet plaque. Hopefully you found this video helpful and you're ready to look into the Mills Act for your property. If you have any questions about the Mills Act program or historic preservation in Anaheim, please visit our website or feel free to contact me. Also, stay tuned for our next video in our series on how to apply for the Mills Act. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so that video, it looked a little bit different back then. It was actually done in-house. One of our former planners was also a talented videographer, so we were able to take some camera equipment out in our historic districts and record that video. We also prepared another one about how to apply to our program, and they have both been really useful tools. Whenever somebody calls to ask about the Mills Act, I always send them a link to the videos, and I think it's really helpful for them to not only kind of walk through the process, but also to put a face to the program, hopefully make it a little bit less scary.
Okay, great. So on the subject of reaching people, what do you find in the people who are coming into your Mills Act program or into preservation in general in the city, are you seeing changes in demographics in the younger generation of people, in terms of like younger people or people of different ethnicities? Are you encountering any language difficulties, and how do you deal with those? Want to go ahead, Holly, and talk about that?
Well, currently Santa Ana is fairly diverse. We are having a large influx of both Hispanics and Vietnamese coming into the community. And right now, Santa Ana has approximately a 75% Hispanic population. What we are seeing, though, is a lot of the new folks that are moving into the historic districts especially are younger. They're the young professionals who are really looking and searching out historic properties, which that's an amazing thing that didn't happen in the past, but I think it's because the younger generation really has learned to appreciate some of the older styles and craftsmanship.
And do you see that in those younger people coming in, are you seeing an ethnic mix that reflects the city in general?
No, it's a wide variety. It really is a wide variety of folks that are coming in. They're looking for a more urban life experience, and at the same time, they want the historic district where it's tree-lined streets and front yard setbacks and things like that. The urban feeling is just right around the corner for them. So it's the best of both worlds for them.
Which is true of Orange as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, we've had a similar experience in Orange. People who are buying into the historic district. The preservation program has been running for long enough that people are aware of what they're buying into, for the most part. Largely through the advertising from our real estate agents and from our local community groups too. One of the things that I think is particular about Orange and our Old Town Historic District is that Chapman University is within the boundaries of the historic district. And that's been both a benefit and a burden to the historic district because there's a lot of students who are living in the historic district who live in historic houses. And it has, in some ways, changed the character of the kind of neighborhood feel of the historic district. And that balance of all of the benefits that Chapman University brings in terms of students and professors and administrators living in the historic district, balanced with some of the impacts to kind of neighborhood character and neighborhood life has been one of the challenges that we're still working through.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
In Anaheim, we have a fairly large population of Hispanic people as well. In our downtown historic districts, though, primarily the homeowners seem to be white, with the renters being more Hispanic. We have been seeing more of an increase in Hispanic homeowners as well, though. And we do have the occasional instance where someone wants to apply for the Mills Act that doesn't speak English. And so in those cases, you will usually bring out a planner that is bilingual to come along on our consultation and help translate. But it doesn't happen very often, maybe just once or twice a year that we'll have a consultation with a Spanish-speaking homeowner. We've also been seeing, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, one of our citrus packing houses down here in downtown Anaheim was restored with the help of our redevelopment agency. And since then, it's now been converted to a food hall and created a lot more life in downtown. It's made it much more walkable. And after that happened, I feel like we've seen a difference in our Mills Act consultations. The people that we see who have been moving into historic districts are younger, young professionals, young families that want to feel this kind of like sense of place and be in an area that is walkable and have a house that has character to it. Sometimes I call it like a hipster revolution that's happening in downtown Anaheim.
Nobody saw that coming.
Yeah. But it has been really interesting to see, and we see these people moving in that are so excited about being a part of that identity and what's going on in downtown Anaheim and being part of the historic preservation program as well. So it's been kind of fun.
Good. How about sustainability? Is this, do you find that living in smaller, older houses, and we have this great, saying, of course, that the greenest building is the one that's already built. Do you find that the kind of sustainability aspect of it is something that has currency in your city? Maybe you don't, but if you do, I'd be interested to know. Is that an angle that kind of works for you? Or does it not come up?
Well, the one thing that I noticed isn't so much related to sustainable, but that people are very aware that a lot of the older homes are very well made. Most of them are framed in redwood. That would be impossible, in today's world, to get that kind of. Materials were done well, and a lot of the craftsmanship for portions of the home are also very important. Where several years ago, when I very first started in Santa Ana, we saw a lot of people who wanted to just come and tear down because they thought, oh, it's just old. And now they're starting to realize more the value of some of those older homes, older buildings. And in fact, that's been the primary thing that has caused a renaissance in our downtown, is because younger people did come to Santa Ana for that architecture, for that realism, and they saw value in that older style of architecture. It gave it a sense of place. It gave them a unique feeling. And so I think definitely preservation is really part of being sustainable. We can't have one without the other.
I think it's sort of interesting because I actually come from a utilities background and used to work in energy efficiency. And so when I switched to historic preservation, I felt like it took a little bit of a like a mindset shift, and remembering that historic homes can be energy efficient as well, even though they don't have vinyl windows, and it's trying to
we got one.
Trying to educate the homeowners when they come in to pull permits to take out their original wood windows is something that is constantly a challenge, an opportunity for us. And also, things like solar panels, figuring out what to do with those and how we want to address the energy needs for these historic homes, but also retaining our streetscapes. And then our Mosaic program doesn't allow artificial turf either. So giving them all other alternatives like drought tolerant landscaping. Sometimes it takes a little bit more of creativity, but there are ways to keep these homes more energy and more efficient too.
Yeah, in Orange, we mostly talk about sustainability, or I mostly talk about sustainability when someone comes into the counter and asks me about altering some feature of a building, mostly the windows. And then we're talking about, well, you can't even actually recreate that window in the same materials. And your vinyl window is not really that much more efficient. You can weatherproof your existing windows. There are all sorts of things that you can do to preserve the character of your historic house. Solar panels are definitely another challenge that we've seen in Old Town. Balancing the Solar Rights Act with preservation of the streetscape has been a big issue for us, particularly on corner properties where the shape of the roof and the way the house is situated on the lot, it's not necessarily feasible to put the solar panels in a way that's not visible from the street. So that's been an ongoing conversation.
Okay. Let's talk about design review. Marissa, why don't you start this one? You were mentioning to me earlier that your design standards for Old Town Orange are being updated now. How's that process gone, and what are you trying to address with the new standards?
Yeah, so Orange has had design standards for Old Town since 1995, last updated in 1999. They have served the historic district very well. We have certain projects under the design standards that are delegated to staff for review. Larger projects, basically anytime that you're adding square footage in the historic district, that will go in front of our design review committee, so at a public meeting. They've been very effective in preserving the streetscape of the historic district, but the way that they are written is not totally user-friendly. There are basically no illustrations, no photographs in the document at all. It's not a document that's friendly for your average homeowner coming into the counter trying to figure out what their options are to add on to their historic house. So our intent really is to improve that. We're going to be releasing a revision to our design standards this summer, full of illustrations and photographs, and hopefully written in a way that is not so intimidating for people coming into the counter. A little less technical language, more focused on usability. So I'm hopeful that that will be well received by our design review committee and our community groups too.
What do you have in terms of an actual manual of design standards or
We do
design guidelines?
We do have design guidelines for historic buildings and part of our citywide design guidelines. It's a special chapter. We also have appendices to those design guidelines that have a lot of photographs about particular styles of architecture. And then there's actually one appendices that talks about historic colors that were appropriate for different styles. So we have a lot of information out there. Our commission had chosen several years ago to make it as friendly process as possible. So most of the things that we look at are something that can be improved administratively. Anything that's like for like, very small changes to the building, changes to the rear sides that you can't see from public view, those things can just be approved over the counter. And thank goodness I do have a very good rapport with a lot of the folks in the historic world, so they know where to go, they know where to call, and I do field a lot of phone calls and emails. So, and we do outreach to the community as well. So at least once a year we try to get to each active neighborhood that has a lot of historic buildings and talk about it and promote and let them know what needs to be reviewed and maybe what doesn't.
Well, we have recommended design guidelines in our citywide historic preservation plan that I think you helped write, Jennifer. It's very visual. There are a lot of pictures, and I think it's really helpful. Actually, it's on our website, anaheim.net/historic preservation, if you want to take a look at it. But again, they're recommendations as long as you're not a Mills Act property. And so the way we handle that is usually whenever someone comes to the building counter to pull a permit on a historic property, they're required to first speak with someone on the historic preservation staff. And then we just educate the owner on if what they're doing might affect the historic integrity of that building. But then after that, they're able to pull the permit if they'd like to. And usually 9 out of 10 times they still do that, but at least we can say that we at least tried and that we educated that homeowner on the fact that they have a historic property.
I think historically, I mean, you know, within the past, say 5 years ago to 10 years ago, there was a lot of bluffing on the part of the city. To say, well, that's not how it's done.
Bluffing and begging.
If the bluffing doesn't work, then the begging.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, at a certain point, once the Mills Act really caught on and people could see what other homeowners were doing in their immediate surroundings, and you could always say, well, you know, okay, if you need a screen door that your dog won't jump through, how about that one over there? When people would come to us and say, but I need my big metal security door, and we'd say, well, I'm sorry, but, you know, before you start your contract, you're going to take that off. Just to give them options and for them to actually be able to see the options in the streetscape. When you've got a big district like that, there's so many options for which direction people can go, different ideas about how to address particular problems that seem to come up over and over again.
Right, yeah, and at the counter, the people that do end up you know, following the historic design recommendations are the ones that eventually are interested in applying for the Mills Act. So that's really the tool that I use the most to try to convince people to not make those alterations to those historic properties.
Because I think that even if people really want vinyl windows, they understand that someday they're going to want to sell their property and that they're going to need to use a potential Mills Act contract as an incentive for
Increase the
sale.
value.
Yeah, and not only that, but once they realize that sometimes those original materials that add value to the home. Sometimes those vinyl windows decrease the house's value because it's not original anymore. People are looking for those original features. So I think once they kind of learn that too, that's a good tool.
Yeah, trying to get everybody on the same page. These things is not always easy. Let's see. So let's talk a little bit about surveys. Our citywide surveys, have you found them to be useful given that your cities gained much of their land since the 1950s? So do you have a sense of what is hidden out there, or are you hoping you're going to discover it through the survey process in the future eventually? Or I know that Santa Ana, you've got the whole city covered by survey, but I know that Orange and Anaheim don't necessarily. So if you guys want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, our survey was done back in the 1980s. It hasn't been updated since. It was really only a survey for our downtown historic districts. So obviously needs to be updated. Anaheim is it's a pretty big city. It's 50 square miles. And so there are a lot of parts of the city that we really don't know what kind of resources are out there. Our historic communities, though, that are local, are really centered in downtown in our historic districts. The Anaheim Colony is our main historic district, and the people that live here on the Historic Preservation Committee are really mostly focused on our downtown area. So we just haven't had the push or the support for more of a citywide survey to see what else is out there. But as we get into now mid-century resources becoming historic, I would like to see something happening with more of a citywide effort to survey our structures. But again, I think it's just going to come down to public engagement and also trying to find some sort of funding to do that.
Yeah, Orange has a targeted survey, and it was last updated in 2005 as part of the general plan. So that focused on the Old Town Historic District and basically the boundary around the historic district. And then 3 mid-century residential tracts that were developed by Joseph Eichler. And then a handful of kind of outlying agricultural properties and houses that we knew about from the 1991 survey that we looked at again in 2005, just to make sure they were still there and still potentially eligible. That's been our survey effort thus far. We certainly know that there are potential mid-century commercial resources in particular along the major commercial corridors in Orange. We have not had a survey effort related to that yet. We don't have a complete historic context statement either that really deals with that mid-century development period in Orange. But as we start to see more development proposals that have a potential to impact those resources, we're looking at it from the CEQA standpoint and basically catching those when projects come in and looking at them on a case-by-case basis.
We do have a citywide survey, but it was completed in 2007, I believe. So it still is getting older, and which means that we also have to follow the same route as Marissa does. Is when projects come in, we have to take a look at them. At least it provides us though with a baseline, so that we can gauge if it's gotten better or worse or whatever the resource is. So it has been very helpful for us, but I do think that it's time for us to begin again to go back and do some more survey work.
Do you have a sense of what the mid-century resources in Santa Ana that you might find would be?
Oh my goodness, yes. I would say that probably 90% of our entire housing supply is in the mid-century or older. So we really that does cover a lot for the property in Santa Ana. So there's a lot more that are eligible. We know. We just haven't been aggressive as we were in the beginning. At first, when we began surveying, our code doesn't require the property owner to agree with historic listing.
You don't need owner consent.
Correct. So we were very aggressive, and we were putting things on the list left and right that we really felt were endangered or were very special. Now we take a little bit more conservative approach, and we talk with the owners and hope they
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments about mid-century resources? I mean, it's funny in Anaheim, we looked, when we were doing the citywide preservation plan, we tried very hard to find a good tract that would be representative. There was a Cliff May tract that we went and looked at, and every house just about was completely altered. There were others that we went out and looked at that were very modest, kind of 3 times removed Iko knockoff kind of tracts. And again, the pictures of them from the period and the advertisements were really appealing, and then we'd go and we'd look, and the entire tract would be completely altered. So I think part of it was a problem with the quality of the build. Some of those houses just were really poorly built and really had not, just hadn't lasted long enough for them to have any integrity. And then a lot of it also was just like many years of those types of houses not being recognized as valuable.
Well, it is still very difficult for me to think of historic shag carpet and and like on the wall.
Yeah, a lot of people have that limitation. But in Anaheim, there was something very unexpected that one of the former planners found. He was just driving through the city and found a little grouping of sort of 1960s Regency Revival townhouses. Wow. And that's the kind of thing you just don't. You're not looking for that when you go out surveying. And, so there are little gems out there. I think that we're not even expecting to find, and as time goes by, some of those reveal themselves. Let's see. I think at this point it's 1:05, and I'd be happy to open this up to questions from everybody who's listening out there. So, John, I know that you've probably got some questions that have come up. If you want to transmit those to us, we'd be happy to entertain them.
Sure. I'm not sure if am I on? Okay, I am unmuted. Okay, so we had one question come in so far, and I just to remind people to ask your question, all you have to do is either type it into the Q&A box, raise your hand, or type it into the chat box. I'm checking all 3 right now. So now is the time to start asking questions, but I'll start with the one that's already arrived. And the question from Libby is, as a landscape designer and board member of the California Garden and Landscape History Society, I'd like to know, yeah. She wanted to know if there are any historic cultural landscapes in any of the 3 cities, either orange groves, fruit orchards, parks, or anything like that.
Do you want to talk about the center?
Yeah, so the plaza in our commercial district is a little elliptical park. The pathways are laid out the way they were historically. The curbs are historic. There are some historic plantings as well. We also have a WPA era park, Hart Park, which runs along Santiago Creek at the southern edge of the Old Town Historic District. And that is another cultural landscape with walkways and some historic plantings and a historic bull house that's also recognized.
We do have some cultural landscapes in Santa Ana. We have Birch Park, Flatiron Park, Jack Fisher Park, where there's no Boy Scout cottage there. We have yet to take the steps, though, to designate historic landscapes at this point. We've definitely been looking into it, but we haven't to date.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually. So we have Pearson Park, but I don't know when that was.
Yeah, Pearson Park is a historic park that has a number of historic elements. It has an old Greek theater. It's got some sort of ponds and plantings that were planted by Rudy Boysen of Boysenberry fame. And it has, I think the general layout of it kind of reflects what it was historically, even though some of the elements have been lost or replaced. But yeah, there is a historic park in the middle of the city.
Yeah. And then we have, we have a place called Founders Park, which 2 of our historic buildings were moved to. There's an old Victorian, and then also the house from one of our original founders, George Hansen, who moved to that. And then I think it was sort of designed to look like, what they used to look like back in that day.
Yeah, it's a new park that was designed as a setting for these historic houses that are 50 years, 45 years apart in age. Actually, there's one interesting resource in that park. There's a big Morton Bay fig, which is one of a number of them in town. And this particular one is the one that was the model for the Swiss Family Robinson treehouse at Disneyland.
Oh my goodness.
And it was owned by the Moon family, and I guess they went and looked at this tree and kind of and they ended up giving the Moon family free passes to Disneyland for life. And this was before Disneyland was really even built, and I'm sure the Moons were just like, oh, thanks. Anyway, that's that particular Morton Bay fig has that kind of funny. Yeah, that's really good one.
One of the things none of us really touched on either was the importance of the streetscape in a historic district, and the way the front yards and the parkways and sidewalks all work together to contribute to the character of the historic district. One of the challenges we're seeing in Orange is people who are interested in xeriscape in their front yard. So lots of gravel, lots of decomposed granite, succulents in front yards that were mostly lawns with some foundation plantings historically. I think Christy mentioned very briefly artificial turf. That's still a controversial subject in the historic district, I would say. I think it's interesting as the quality of artificial turf gets better and better. That I think it might actually end up being a more compatible solution to a front yard than mostly gravel or decomposed granite. We'll see.
And the one big thing though is that at least with landscape and the gravel is that all that can be removed and can be put back. So
yeah, we treat it very much like we treat paint. It's kind of a personal choice that you can remove and fix at the next property.
And there is one small remnant of an orange grove in Anaheim. I don't know do you have any orange grove remnants in your cities?
we have a couple that were gentlemen's orchards, which are really they weren't meant to be large commercial operations. They were meant to promote a lifestyle so that people would come out from the East Coast and they picture themselves with orchards in their yard and run a California Western dynamic. And so they have a number of orange trees. So we do have a couple of those left and some remnant orchard pieces here and there. Well, an interesting story is there used to be a lot of walnut groves in Santa Ana, and one of our historic rehabs that we did when we took the siding and the interior walls off, the entire walls were completely filled with walnuts up to the roof.
Oh my God!
From squirrels.
Squirrels. Okay. This wasn't a primitive insulation.
No, it wasn't. So there's that. Yeah, that is just apparently.
Little remnants of the agricultural past. Okay. Well, thanks for that interesting question.
Okay, so while you were answering the first question, we had an additional 7 questions come in. So,
Great.
so I think I'll go through these one by one, and you might be able to read them as well if you can pull up the Q&A box. But the first one I'm going to go through them in the order that they were received. First question is, do any of the cities have demolition by neglect ordinances?
No, we do not. We did contemplate that, but it got into so much subjective with that. What's the tipping point? And we ended up getting into a legal quagmire, and we ended up just sort of shelving that idea. So we don't have one.
Yeah, Orange does not either. We have standard maintenance provisions that are required in the historic district and in the code in general, but nothing specific about demolition.
No, the only thing we really have is that 60-day notice. So if someone was to demolish a historic property, obviously not a Mills Act property, they have to let us know 60 days in advance before they can pull that permit.
So then the next one is, have any of the city's Mills Act contracts been canceled, and how was that handled?
That would be
bad. Yeah, we have a story.
You know, we have never had that, thank goodness, because as you know, the penalty is 12.5% of the fair market value of the property. And so that would be a nightmare. No. Thank goodness we have not.
We have never had a cancellation.
We've had some properties that have been out of compliance for over 5 years, and but in one case, it was an elderly gentleman who wasn't getting any tax savings. And we knew that we would have to come to city council to cancel his contract. And we just realized that the implications of that would just be too hard. And just morally, we felt weird about that. So that ended up being resolved over when he sold his house. So that worked out fine. I think actually 2 years ago, we did have one property decide to get out of their multi contract, and so that 10-year period is winding down. It was actually a commercial property, hasn't been seeing any tax savings for a long time, and they just didn't want the additional regulations, so they decided to opt out of that contract. But they have about 8 more years to get off of it.
Just to let you know, too, in case you aren't familiar. But when they Mills Act contract, when they say it's a 10-year contract, it doesn't necessarily mean that the contract goes to 10 years ends or renews 10 years. It's really if one party or the other, the city or the property owner, decides to cancel the contract, it takes 10 years for that contract to expire. So the purpose of that 10-year thing is to protect homeowners. So if a city or local government ever decided, this is costing the city too much money, we want out of this Mills Act business, the property owners have 10 years to figure out what they want to do, if they want to sell, get out of the contract or whatever.
And I believe it adjusts during that 10 years so that it goes gradually back up to what it would be, so it's not just hit all of a sudden. Okay, let's see. What is the best way to strengthen historic resources ordinances? This is elected. I'm not sure what that's that part of it. Yeah. Anybody have any thoughts on that? What are the things that you feel? It's really just Santa Ana. You're the only ones with an actual ordinance, right? Okay. So mostly, I think part of this is the politics of Orange County, perhaps. That having a historic preservation ordinance. It's something that the cities know they need to address, and it seems like most of them have done it through elements in the general plan, but not through an ordinance. So right there, you're starting at a slightly weaker position. But maybe you could talk a bit about what would make your program stronger in terms of an ordinance or whatever would apply.
I do think that the ordinance is probably, an actual ordinance in the municipal code is probably the first step to making any preservation program stronger. Because then it's actually got legal teeth that you can do something with. You can take them to court if need be, all different kinds of remedies. The code, though, is actually more of a hammer. It's the stick instead of the carrot. And so it really is going to depend, too, on how it's applied, how strict you're going to uphold those things. So it's completely the political culture. Because in Santa Ana, although we have an ordinance, still we choose to lead gently rather than come down with hammers on folks, just because we want to promote preservation rather than enforce it.
Yeah, in Orange, we're specifically looking at a potential update to our demolition review ordinance at the moment. Right now, we do demolition review only for properties inside the Old Town Historic District. We're looking at the potential of whether or not that could be expanded to anything that's been surveyed in the city. We're also looking at potentially strengthening the penalties for unpermitted demolitions in the historic district specifically. There's been some concern at the council level about a couple of unpermitted demolitions that have happened recently. So that's one specific area of a historic preservation ordinance that could be a starting place for a city who's interested in historic preservation.
Anaheim has never had an ordinance. I think it is just that mindset that we have here is all about property rights and making it more of a voluntary program. It's what Anaheim calls itself freedom friendly. So giving itself if property owners more ability to regulate what's going on their own property. So I think it would take a lot of change both politically and also through public engagement. Our historic preservation communities don't want an ordinance. We brought it up to them even just recently. They decided they didn't want anything stronger. So I think a lot would have to change in the mindset there. And then, you know, if all of a sudden there were a series of demolitions, you know, that were happening downtown, maybe that would change people's minds. But as of right now, it doesn't seem like we'll be changing anytime soon. So there are advantages and disadvantages. The advantage, of course, is it streamlines our permitting process. If design review is much easier, because it can be happening over the counter. But then, of course, it's easier to have historic properties be demolished. And in the 4 years that I've been in this position, I think there have probably been 5 properties that have been demolished. 4 of those happened while I was on maternity leave, so I don't take responsibility for that. But it can happen a lot easier without ordinance.
All right, our next question is, let's see, do you have a sense of what other Orange County cities are doing regarding preservation?
Yeah, I think so. As a result from our meetings together, we actually formed a countywide historic preservation planner working group. Also a little bit of a support group among preservation planners. We've had it for about a year now. So it's actually been a really useful tool for us to sit down and get ideas of what other people are doing in other Orange County cities and best practices. And there really is a wide range of how people run their programs, you know, whether or not they have an ordinance or a CLG, if they're regulating all of their historic structures or just the ones in their districts. So it's kind of across the board that we've seen.
There's also ours is more of a professional related group that we get together and basically cry on each other's shoulders. But there's another group as well called the Orange County Preservation Group, that they are just members of the community who have a strong interest in preservation, and they meet regularly too. I haven't, there's another member of Santa Ana staff that attends those meetings, but they're looking at it more of a county-wide perspective and what can be done. Instead of looking at individual cities, they want to look at specifically those areas affected by the county, and how those could be preserved in relation to the county as a whole.
Okay. Let's see. What process do you use to engage local realtors to inform them about the benefits of the Mills Act and historic districts? I mean, at Anaheim, realtors are driving so much.
Some are fully aware already of the program. You know, sometimes when realtors will call my office and ask about the Mills Act or just you know, generally about historic preservation for a property that they're listing. Of course, I'll let them know about the Mills Act. That's where those videos are also useful. I can refer them to the videos as well, and they usually want to know if they can put something in their listing about the property being eligible for this program. And so generally the realtor community is pretty much aware of the program, but if not, we like to just let them know about the benefits of it when we talk to them about individual properties.
Yeah, it's similar in Orange. We don't really need to advertise the Mills Act program anymore because the community is so aware of it. I will say, I think early on, a lot of outreach from our community groups was important. The Old Town Preservation Association in particular is a big supporter of the Mills Act program. So engaging them is an important component of that outreach.
I think that having them speak to each other is really kind of the way it really spreads. And it's also, you know, you can certainly also do, you know, people often talk about doing workshops for local realtors through the board of realtors or whatever, where we come and talk to them about architecture so they can become more educated about different styles and different types of houses in town. I mean, I think that educating them in that same way about preservation tools would also be a good idea.
And I'll jump in here. This is John. CPF is also holding a realtors workshop at our annual conference in Pasadena this year. So if any realtors are logged in right now, please do look into that. And it's a really affordable solution to learn. I think it's a 6-hour workshop, and it'll cover all types of financial incentives for historic properties, including the Mills Act. And we do regular programs specifically for realtors. We did a 4-part certification program, both at our San Diego conference and about 2 years ago, which was done entirely online.
Great. Okay, great.
Keep an eye on our website.
Yeah, good to know. Okay, I'm going to skip the question about xeriscaping. That's XERI, by the way, because we already kind of talked about that. Let's see, the Mills Act. Okay, this is a good one. Let's see. Do you see the Mills Act becoming an effective incentive to rehabilitate or avoid demolition for mid-century commercial properties? I'd like to think so.
I would hope so, but again, like Holly and I mentioned, there are some limitations in how the assessor's office calculates Mills Act tax savings. So I think that would have to be determined to see if there would be long-term benefits to that or not.
Yeah, we really haven't seen that does provide, at least in our city, we haven't seen that it provides commercial buildings long-term benefits at all. So it is helpful in that it helps them come up with the money to be able to rehab them. And hopefully once they're rehabbed, people will see more value and use it the way it's supposed to be. But other than that, I don't know that the Mills Act is the best for commercial.
So really, whatever applies to commercial buildings in general is also going to apply to mid-century buildings in terms of the finances. But I think what I'd like to see in Anaheim is for us to find a case study where there's just a very small number of really great mid-century commercial buildings that we'd like to see get interested in the program just so that they can become kind of ambassadors for mid-century architecture in general, and maybe we can use the Mills Act to do that, even if in the long term it's not going to be the financial incentive that is as valuable as it is for residential. Okay, let's see. What was the budget for the Mills Act videos in Anaheim?
Oh.
Since you did them in-house, it's like a little skewed.
Yeah, there wasn't really much of a budget for it, since one of our planners recorded it for us. There were some upfront expenses. He actually did a whole video series, so we were able to buy him some camera equipment. And basically then it was just staff time. So there were two planners behind the scenes, the videographer and then another planner helping, and then myself. We shot it, I think, over a course of 2 days. But you wouldn't necessarily need high-tech camera equipment if you just wanted to go out with your iPhone and record something in your historic districts too. That could work. So I don't think it would necessarily need to be high budget or something that you would have to go out and get someone to do. I think we're just trying to make it fun and approachable, and fortunately we just happened to have this planner that was able to do it and help us out with it.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good resource to have, because I can see that being shown at realtor meetings or neighborhood meetings or anybody who has a question. And it's very fun, very approachable, and it shows off some of the resources.
Yeah, you got a little view of what the Anaheim Historic District looks like. Everybody's going to want a great video now. Okay, so our next question is, how has community group and organization input affected historic preservation programs in each city?
Hi, Jeff. This is Anaheim Preservation Association. Nice to see you. Hear you. So I think in Orange, it's been very important in certainly the early efforts in developing the historic district and historic preservation program at all in the city. I think also it's been important in kind of understanding what level of design review and what kinds of projects are appropriate for Orange in terms of new development. Design standards are a static document that really, no matter how well written they are, need interpretation. And I think over time, the input from a community group in terms of what's really important about the character of the historic district and working that into how the design standards are interpreted has been really important for us in Orange.
Yeah, we have the Santa Ana Historical Preservation Society. And we do work hand in hand with them. They are very often our eyes out in the street. So they can let us know, or they ask questions about what's happening to this property or that property. So they keep us honest. So.
Yeah, I think community groups are instrumental to historic preservation in general. It sounds like all three of our cities, preservation really started when community advocates started speaking up. And I'm sure that's probably similar for most cities. In Anaheim, historic preservation used to be under our redevelopment department. And then when that funding fell through, our preservation program was sort of disbanded. And once again, our local advocates started speaking up, and they went to the mayor and lobbied for what ended up being my position. And so that's really why I have a job and why I feel like we even have a historic preservation program. It's because of our community groups that are interested in or advocating for preservation.
Okay, we've got one more question and about just about one more minute. So let's see, Paige and Turnbull asks, since the Mills Act program's inception in your cities, have demographics changed in terms of ethnic or socioeconomic makeup? We talked a little bit about this, but if you're seeing shifts.
Socioeconomic in orange, there's definitely the property values in particular in Old Town are very, very strong. That's partly a result of Chapman University, some economic development efforts on the part of the city, and also I think the strength of the historic district and Mills Act program as well. So now we have seen those changes over time.
And again, with the downtown especially, there's been a large number of younger entrepreneurs coming into the downtown, and that's really done a lot to enhance and the buildings and the streetscape. But on top of that, just playing off what Marissa was saying, is that really in those historic districts and the places that have preponderance of historic buildings, property values are really stable. And even through the drop we saw in the past few years, the recession, those areas really stayed stable in comparison. And I think that speaks to preservation as a whole in the United States.
Yeah, and then also, you know, as our Mills Act programs grow, I feel like our streetscapes are really going to be impacted in a good way. And we can see the advantage and the potential that Mills Act really brings to the community. There are some areas in Anaheim's historic districts that still haven't really quite been touched by those revitalization efforts, mostly in areas that are more rental housing or apartment communities. We actually do have some areas in our downtown that have a bit more crime and even some gangs in our historic districts. And so I think that that's going to be something that is going to be a challenge going forward in a large part of our historic districts. If we're seeing that happen, and it's going to make those owners of historic properties in those areas much less likely to want to enter our programs if they would have to take off their security screens and take out their large block wall fences. So it's going to continue to be an issue for us, I think.
I mean, it's interesting how the perception of the threat of crime or whatever, we've seen it really change in the colony. A lot of streets where, people, we were talking about the security screen doors earlier. Now people really don't bat an eyelash when we ask them to take those off. They kind of look like, oh, I've been meaning to do that since I bought the house. And so people have so few of those compared to what they had 10 years ago that people don't look at their neighbor's house and go, oh, I better have one of those too, or else they're going to hit my house. I mean, people have glass front doors and no security screens on them now, on pretty modest streets where maybe they wouldn't have felt comfortable with that 10 years ago. And I think also just with the Mills Act, with so many young families coming in and buying in the colony, we've seen that the Mills Act is really what's going to allow, with the property values going up, the Mills Act is really going to allow them to have a little break that's going to make those houses more affordable. Yeah. Okay, it looks like that's all the questions we have. So thanks everybody who's still hanging in there with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in.
Okay, thank you, and thanks to our panelists. I also wanted to remind everybody that in the chat box you'll find a link going to a survey, and I do encourage everybody in attendance here today to take that survey. It allows our speakers to know how they did, and it also allows us to improve our programs. And there's a comment box in that survey that allows you to suggest future programs if there's a type of program that you think we should run. So please do fill out that survey, and thanks again to our panelists. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope to see you in our next program. and maybe even at our conference in Pasadena from May 10th through the 13th. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Oh, and as a reminder, I'm going to leave the room open, but I'm going to turn off the sound and the video. So it gives you plenty of time to respond to that survey.